It's a restaurant that delivered pizza that wasn't the least bit spicy, dozens of the latest arcade games, and a musical stage show performed by dead-eyed robots that would haunt you for the rest of your life. It was Las Vegas for third graders. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Chuck E. Cheese. Chuck E. Cheese is a restaurant/play facility founded in 1977 that promised food and fun for the whole family. It created the model for hybrid eatertainment centers, exploiting the rising popularity of video games, kids' universal love for pizza, and the hypnotic spectacle of choreographed rock and roll robots. Chuck E. Cheese was the brainchild of Nolan Bushnell. During college, he worked at Lagoon Amusement Park in Farmington, Utah, first as a game operator, then maintenance, then manager, learning the ins and outs of carnival management, the secrets behind the games, and how to profit from them. After graduating from the University of Utah's College of Engineering in 1968, he moved to California hoping to get hired by Disney. When that didn't happen, he instead began working for a company called Ampex as an electrical engineer. Fate introduced him to Ted Dabney, with whom he shared his idea for a chain of pizza parlors paired with games, a pseudo-carnival environment on a smaller scale. A simple business plan. Teenagers would be drawn to a place with arcade games that also served pizza. And maybe there's a show going on, something like the Country Bear Jamboree from Disney World. Something that provides spectacle and entertainment, but also doesn't require the expense of human employees. Dabney was intrigued. It sounded like fun to him, a project to work on outside of their regular jobs. One night, Bushnell took Dabney to the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Computer Labs to see one of the first video games ever created, called Space War. Space War was the first video game to have multiple units produced and hosted at different university labs where students and faculty could assist in its development. Bushnell thought maybe they could get into the business of developing something like Space War, but the money didn't make sense at the time given the cost of computer chips, so they went back to the pizza parlor idea. In 1972, as processing power became more affordable, Bushnell and Dabney finally started their own company focused on video games instead of pizza, called Atari. By 1976, Atari was successful developing arcade games, but didn't have the money they needed to put their new home console into development. Arcades existed, restaurants existed, but Bushnell was concerned about creating a new business that would be in direct competition with Atari's customers. Bushnell continued to look for ways to differentiate Atari's pizza parlors from regular arcades. He happened to take a trip to Disneyland where he saw Disney's Tiki Room. He knew the various puppets were not particularly complex, something easily replicated by the designers and engineers he regularly worked with. Bushnell also realized that he wanted to have a branded mascot and longer form entertainment like animated skits. He figured kids would want to play the games, but the parents are going to be bored. The more he can keep everyone entertained, the less they're going to want to leave. The longer they stay, the more pizza they'll eat, and the more quarters they'll put in the games. Bushnell knew that selling arcade cabinets was obviously very profitable, but the real money was on the other side of the transaction. See, each arcade cabinet sale was roughly $1,500, but the businesses that bought them would make 10 to 20 times as much in quarters over the life of the unit. Bushnell went to an amusement trade show and bought a mascot character costume. At first glance, he thought he had purchased an anthropomorphic coyote, leading Bushnell to use the codename Coyote Pizza for the restaurants. He gave it to his engineers and asked them to animate it, saying, "Make it talk." However, when his team of engineers took a look at the suit, they let him know that there was a pink tail included with the rest of the parts and that this was, in fact, a rat. Bushnell simply shrugged and changed the working name to Rick Rat's Pizza. But Atari's marketing people suggested that perhaps that wasn't the best name for a restaurant given the societal association with rats and the potential to draw the ire of health inspectors. Bushnell deferred to their expertise and asked them to come up with a better name, a happy name. Atari Consumer Division President and General Manager of the Restaurant Operating Division, Gene Landrum, put together a presentation that showcased the entire pitch for the new business. The new venture was called The Big Cheese, referring to both the business and the rat mascot. Until it wasn't. Turns out Marriott Hotels already owned that name. Instead of waiting for the trademark to expire or attempt to purchase it, Atari's team came up with a different name, Chuck E. Cheese. Atari was still looking to get their new home console out, but they needed more money. Seeking a corporate investor, they were instead purchased altogether by Warner Communications in 1976 for $28 million. Warner provided the funding to develop and release the Atari VCS in 1977, which would later be known as the Atari 2600. Of the $28 million that Warner Communications paid for Atari, $15 million of that went right into Bushnell's pocket. In 1977, Atari, now owned by Warner Communications, opened the first Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater in San Jose, California, a 5,000 square foot location dwarfing the size of your average pizza place. But even that proved to be too small. The response from the public was overwhelming. People, families waiting in line to eat pizza and play games. Bushnell was excited and ready to go bigger. Bigger restaurants and more of them. But new Atari owner Warner Communications wasn't interested in the restaurant business. And technically, Bushnell created Chuck E. Cheese while he was working at Atari, so technically Warner Communications owned it. After selling Atari, Bushnell had all the capital he needed to switch sides in the arcade business. In 1978, when Warner refused to open additional locations, Bushnell was able to purchase the rights to Chuck E. Cheese for $500,000 just before getting fired/resigning from Atari due to conflicts in management style. Atari's Gene Landrum went with him to be the president and COO of the new independent company, Pizza Time Theater. Within a year, they opened 5 more locations in California, each bringing in between $500,000 and $1 million in sales. In 1979, growth continued as Pizza Time Theater began to license out for franchises, including one franchisee in particular, Robert Brock, who had made his name working in the same capacity for Holiday Inn hotels. The contract between Pizza Time Theater and Brock granted Brock the exclusive franchise rights for 16 states in the South and Midwest U.S. Brock planned to open 285 locations within a 5-year period. To keep his business separate from his Holiday Inn work, he set up a new company called Pizza Showbiz. That same year, Brock was introduced to Aaron Fechter, an engineer working with animatronics. In Brock's opinion, Fechter's robots were much better than the ones Bushnell had in the existing locations. Smoother movements with more realistic expressions, resulting in far more lifelike characters. Turns out Bushnell had attempted to buy Fechter's robots at one point, and when Fechter declined, Bushnell proceeded to tell Brock that Fechter was just a kid making junk in his garage. Upon further investigation, Brock found that Fechter's company, Creative Engineering, was a thriving business making $1 million a year doing work for amusement parks. Brock had doubts about the contract he had agreed to with Bushnell. There was a lot of stores to sign up in a short amount of time. Plus, there was more money in being a franchisor than there was in being a franchisee. By the end of 1979, Brock and Fechter teamed up, and Brock gave notice to Bushnell that he was exiting their contract to start his own restaurants called Showbiz Pizza Place. Instead of Chuck E. Cheese, they would have Billy Bob Broccoli. Fechter's Creative Engineering would make the robots, and everything else related to the business model would remain the same.
You can be young.
You can be old. You can be me.
You can be bold.
Wow, like
Chuck E. Cheese, you can be real cheesy.
A great Italian pizza recipe with tons of mozzarella.
You can be real juicy.
All kinds of toppings for a hungry fella.
You can be wiggly. You can be giggly.
You can be a star.
You can eat from the bar. You can be a man.
You can be a mouse.
You can be anything you want to be.
At Chuck E. Cheese, it's the only one.
When you're hungry for fun.
Showbiz Pizza opened in Kansas City, Missouri in 1980 and were immediately sued by Bushnell for breach of contract. Brock countersued for misrepresentation, claiming that Bushnell had assured him Chuck E. Cheese was the only company making animatronic robot characters outside of Disney, proven false by the existence of Fechter's company. The matter was ultimately settled out of court, with Showbiz remaining in business at a cost. For the next 14 years, they would be required to pay Chuck E. Cheese a percentage of their profits, estimated to be in the range of $50 million, assuming they both stayed in business that long. Both Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza grew fast, competing directly against each other for the same customers in nearly every market. In fact, opening so many locations that they were also competing against themselves. Both franchises doing what they could to keep things fresh at each location, upgrading robots, changing the characters in the shows, changing the performances, bringing in the newest games. In some cities, there were enough locations that you could go to 2 Chuck E. Cheeses and a Showbiz Pizza Place for 3 completely unique stage shows. In 1981, Chuck E. Cheese went public, increasing Bushnell's net worth to over $70 million. As someone more interested in creating a thing as opposed to maintaining it, Bushnell's attention and that money was increasingly focused elsewhere. By 1983, competition between the 2 franchises was making it difficult for both to continue to thrive in the market, not to mention that the majority of Chuck's profits were being invested by Bushnell in other ventures like animation, adult-focused restaurants, and video game development. Unable to realize profits from those new ventures, Chuck E. Cheese posted an annual loss of $15 million. In 1984, Bushnell stepped down as CEO, and Chuck E. Cheese filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the first time. 1985 was a pivotal year for Chuck E. Cheese, Showbiz Pizza, and the entire entertainment industry. Robert Brock, owner of Showbiz Pizza Place, former partner of Nolan Bushnell, purchased Chuck E. Cheese in its entirety, ending the bitter competition between the 2 businesses. The 2 companies were merged, and restructuring began. Can't believe I got that in one take. Vector and his robot company Creative Engineering left, meaning that Showbiz Pizza's marquee attraction, the Rock-afire Explosion stage show, was no longer exclusive. Brock stepped down as CEO of Showbiz Pizza. Hundreds of low-performing stores were closed.
Try the great new action games at Chuck E. Cheese. Fewer video games, more favorites everyone can play, and 2-for-1 tokens every weekend this month.
Share the fun, come on and share the fun. The fun at Chuck E. Cheese.
New CEO Richard Frank recognized that the rapid growth of both franchises had left them a physical and financial mess. Stores that remained were given a facelift. The focus was put on quality food, quality service, patron satisfaction, and banning unaccompanied teenagers to reassert that these were family-friendly and family-focused restaurants. By 1992, the entire franchise had been unified under the Chuck E. Cheese branding. Rock-afire Explosion robots were reskinned with Chuck E. Cheese's Munch's Make-Believe Band, and profits slowly returned. By 1998, Showbiz Pizza Time was renamed CEC Entertainment Incorporated. CEC meaning Chuck E. Cheese, of course, the face of the franchise, a face that has evolved over time to stay hip and cool and appeal to 8-year-olds. Originally a gruff cigar-smoking carny from New Jersey. He quit smoking thanks to public advocacy campaigns like the Great American Smokeout, which succeeded in getting smoking banned from workplaces, domestic flights, and restaurants. In 1993, he was changed into a more marketing-friendly mouse, and in 1995, a more childlike, youthful appearance. Chuck E. Cheese's business was originally about the pizza, the games, and the robot stage shows, but over the years it included an increasing number of prizes that could be purchased by winning tickets from the various games like Skee-Ball, eventually becoming as important to the profitability of the business as any other part. Lots of toys, plush dolls, figures, cars, bendies, pencils and pens, stickers, cups, pins, shirts, hats, licensed merchandise produced specifically for this purpose, and partnerships with companies like Mattel to produce things like Chuck E. Cheese branded Barbie dolls. Chuck E. Cheese has had games released for the Nintendo Wii, the Nintendo DS, a board game called Chuck E. Cheese's Skytubes, and while Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza restaurants were certainly the inspiration for the Five Nights at Freddy's games, they weren't officially associated with them in any way. In 1999, Chuck E. Cheese appeared in his first movie called Chuck E. Cheese and the Galaxy 5000, a direct-to-video production available for purchase in the restaurants and at Target stores. It's a live-action movie that follows Chuck and his friends as they compete in a race, the Galaxy 5000, to help a kid named Charlie Rocket get the $50,000 he needs to fix a tractor so his aunt and uncle can keep their farm, but they'll have to face off against Dr. Zoom and his goons who will do anything they can to stop Chuck and take the prize money for themselves. It may seem strange to say about a franchise that has been in business for nearly 50 years, but Chuck E. Cheese was flawed from its founding. Bushnell recognized years later that the saturation of the marketplace was part of the problem. The product Chuck E. Cheese sold was novelty, and the novelty wore off fast. As he saw it, people didn't want to go to Chuck E. Cheese 3 times a month. It was more like once every other month. On top of that, it was unrealistic to think that they would have a packed house every night, especially when there were so many locations within a region or a certain population.
Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater in Irving hasn't had a crowd like this for a long time. That's part of the reason it went broke.
36,000 is to my right again. 37 right behind you. We're off and running.
Nearly 200 very serious bidders from around the nation crowded the tables where a computerized Chuck E. Cheese and assorted other animated characters once played to smiling, pizza-gulping youngsters.
Sold for $41,000.
Everything inside 61 Pizza Time theaters was sold today, from Chuck E. Cheese himself right on down to the custom carpet. There is no mystery to this downfall. Pizza Time says people simply quit spending money in its big collection of video games.
Over the years, the business skewed younger and younger, with birthday parties comprising a majority of their business. Traffic and revenue began declining in the early 2000s, and in 2014, CEC Entertainment was purchased by Apollo Global Management for $950 million. This led to a rebrand referred to as 2.0 in 2017, which included the rollout of Chuck E. Cheese himself as a rock and roll star. Stores were reimagined as more a traditional family restaurant instead of a party center for young kids. Locations were redressed with muted colors, an open kitchen, and play pass cards instead of tokens. The animatronic shows that had been synonymous with the brand for decades were replaced with an open dance floor. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic nearly put Chuck E. Cheese out of business for good, taking losses estimated in the billions, laying off thousands of employees, and once again landing in Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. To keep the business alive, Chuck E. Cheese pivoted to offering their pizza through a virtual brand delivered by companies like Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber Eats. Pasquale's Pizza and Wings, named after their original character, Pasquale the Singing Chef, was available for purchase even when the physical locations were closed. The pizza was upgraded in an attempt to appeal to a larger pizza-eating customer base than perhaps those that would have visited their physical locations previously. Thicker crust, extra sauce, new blends of cheese and seasonings. As the delivery service caught on, they added cheesy bread, twice-baked wings, and brownies. As of this video, you can still order Pasquale's Pizza, and in fact, you can still go to Chuck E. Cheese, assuming you're bringing kids with you. Kids that belong to you. Because Chapter 11 worked, and once again, Chuck E. Cheese emerged with less debt, fewer stores, and a new focus. Hosting birthday parties has always been part of the business, but now it is the business. Today, Chuck E. Cheese is all about creating a one-of-a-kind environment for kids to let loose, have fun, and win some tickets to be exchanged for prizes. It's not the same Chuck E. Cheese their parents and grandparents grew up with. The animatronics are long gone, but the pizza and games are still there. For nearly 50 years, Chuck E. Cheese has persevered, creating a dining and entertainment experience unlike any other. A place where a kid can be a kid. Thanks for watching. Please hit like if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you would like early access to the videos ad-free, as well as behind-the-scenes features, sneak peeks at upcoming projects, and exclusive monthly podcast about the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy and let us know in the comments down below, which side of the war were you on? Team Chuck E. Cheese or Team Showbiz Pizza? I was definitely Team Showbiz Pizza. In fact, I don't think I've ever even been in a Chuck E. Cheese. My 7th birthday party was at the Showbiz Pizza in Jacksonville, Florida. Somewhere in our family photo albums, there's a picture of me getting birthday spankings from Billy Bob Broccoli, but you won't see that on the internet as long as I'm still alive. Chris, if you're watching, I'm trusting you to do the right thing. Keep it to yourself.
I wanted that picture. Cut.